I do not remember when swords and sorcery style fantasy made its way into my life. I know that I probably saw Disney's The Sword and the Stone and Robin Hood movies when I was a kid. Movies like Labyrinth and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves probably fueled my desire for fantasy stories too, but the Lord of the Rings movies were a long way off, and there were no fantasy comics that I could find at Rite Aid. I did find my way into the fantasy section of the Thompson Library one day and discovered Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weis's Dragonlance novels, falling in love instantly. I already loved reading, consuming every collected edition of a comic strip that I could find, like Peanuts, Beetle Bailey, Garfield, Foxtrot, and Bloom County. Eventually, I moved on to books that were based on comic books, like Michael Golden's Mutant Empire trilogy of X-Men novels, or some Spider-Man books, and other young adult series, like Animorphs. But I was quickly ready for longer books, and the Dragonlance novels were perfect. Here were stories about dragons and knights, of half-elves struggling with their identities, which really reminded me of the X-Men, and so much more. Combine that with the sprawling woods that surrounded our property, and it's no wonder that I fell in love with the genre. Every time that I went outside, a gnarled tree branch could become a wizard's staff or a warrior's sword. Dragons could have lived in those woods, if I only looked hard enough. And of course elves and dwarves lived out there. They were just hiding. It was obvious. My fascination with the genre stayed largely in novels, though. Finding a good fantasy movie wasn't easy. Fantasy comics didn't exist, as far as I knew at the time, and my first Final Fantasy game was 7, which was a far cry from the standard fantasy tale. The idea of a fantasy comic sounded great, but there were just none to be found. So I stuck with what I could find, buying Uncanny X-Men, and that was enough for me. I learned the characters that made up the world of the X-Men, memorized their lore, and then fell even more in love with the artwork of Joe Madureira. But it wasn't to last. In 1998, Madureira announced that he was leaving Uncanny X-Men with issue 350. He partnered up with 2 other artists to found their own comic production company, Cliffhanger Comics, and launched his own creator-owned title. It was a swords and sorcery one, inspired by the fantasy video games, books, cartoons, anime, and manga that Madureira loved. It was called Battle Chasers. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 11.1, Battle Chasers, a dark and stormy prelude. A lot of my focus and breakdown is on the writing of a comic, or at least in the storytelling capabilities of the artwork. This is a necessity, as this is an audio podcast, and doing a video-based breakdown would take me weeks for just one episode. I know, I have tried. But comic books are one part writing and one part artwork. For a lot of people, the art of a comic book can be a deal breaker. Garbage artwork can ruin the best comic ever written, and great artwork can make up for lackluster writing. Whether artwork is great or not is really subjective, and up to the beholder. And to 10-year-old beholding Ben, Joe Madureira was the best artist alive. Period. So what does Madureira's artwork look like? Well, I'll do my best to paint you a picture. Before I start, though, a small thing. I am still, to this day, not sure if I'm pronouncing Madureira right. So I'm going to be using the shortened form of Madureira's name, which he signed most of his artwork with. Joe Mad. Mad got his start at Marvel when he was 16, which blows my freaking mind, as an intern for editor Danny Fingeroth. He drew a few issues of the anthology book Marvel Comic Presents, as well as a few issues of Excalibur. His art style then was largely influenced by Arthur Art Adams. I know Adams as the best artist on a number of Uncanny X-Men annuals, but he's also the co-creator of characters like Mojo and Longshot. Mad's figures were slightly more cartoony than Adams, a little more animated, but that was okay by me. His men have wide, broad shoulders, the women have pencil-thin waists and noticeable chests. Comics are often known for presenting characters as better than human, and Joe Mad definitely hit that mark. His artwork was pretty detailed, too, putting fur on Beast or drawing individual hairs on Wolverine's muscled arms. Nothing looked too far outside the realm of possibility, but it was definitely much more American then than his artwork would end up becoming. Mad then went on to draw the first Deadpool miniseries, before he eventually moved on to Uncanny X-Men with issue 312. This is the title that I first encountered Joe Mad's artwork on, although it would be a long time until I got my own copy of 312. And I think that it's important to note a few things about the situation of Uncanny X-Men here. The first thing is just how important Uncanny X-Men was at the time. Back in the 90s, the length of time that a comic was running was hugely important to its selling factor. A longer book meant that it had been published for a long time, which was a sign of quality. If Uncanny X-Men was being published consecutively since the 60s, that meant it was a good book. Uncanny was also the sister book to X-Men Volume 2, or as we called it, Adjectiveless X-Men. In 1994, the X-Men ruled Marvel, buoyed by Chris Claremont's 20 years of laying down a solid foundation, the popularity of the animated series on Fox, and a string of amazing artistic talent. Before Joe Mad, artists like Mark Silvestri, Jim Lee, Whilce Portacio, and John Romita Jr. drew Uncanny X-Men, and they were all legends in their own right. Silvestri, Lee, and Portacio left Marvel in '92, though, in order to found Image Comics, and Romita Jr. was then put on the book. This brings me to the second important thing: how utterly different Joe Mad's artwork was at the time. Romita Jr.'s artwork is incredibly blocky and stiff, even now. When I was first learning how to draw, every book that I read said to shape my characters with circles. And Romita's stuff was shaped with squares, I swear to you. I'm not saying that it didn't have charm or that it was bad, and I eventually came to love it as well. But when you compared Romita's artwork to Joe Mad's, it was like comparing a black and white photo to a modern movie. Mad's artwork was kinetic. The characters were shaped more along animation lines, with everything necessary heightened and everything unnecessary stripped down. Hair was bigger and flowed more, the characters' muscles bulged and strained, and their eyes got larger for greater expressiveness. Mad was also a big part of the anime/manga influence that swept through the comic scene in the 90s as well. He wasn't the only artist, but his artwork was some of the most widely distributed, largely thanks to Uncanny X-Men's popularity at the time. While there were many readers who hated this aspect of his art style, I loved it. And I'm sure that it laid the path in my heart that would eventually bring me to anime and manga. Don't let my focus on Mad's ability to convey action fool you into thinking that he was a one-trick pony, though. Mad had an incredible amount of skill in regards to his character's acting. I particularly think that that skill shone on Gambit. Jim Lee's take on the character was mysterious and handsome, sure, but it was Joe Mad who really made me fall in love with him. Mad's Gambit smiled, he joked, he looked like he was playing around during combat or when he was flirting with Storm and Rogue. But Mad could also convey Gambit's bitterness, his own self-hate. Whether it was Gambit sitting on the roof of the mansion and chatting with Storm, or having breakfast with the rest of the team, Mad was able to convey a wide range of emotions. This was true of everyone in the book. The way that Blink leaned into Creed's hand in Astonishing X-Men when they were reunited, the baseball game in issue 325, the conversation between Charles and Beast in issue 326, or the sadistic glee in Sabretooth's eye as he attacked Boom Boom and Psylocke in issue 328, Mad crushed it all. But he couldn't stay on Uncanny X-Men forever. In 1998, Joe Mad felt that Uncanny was becoming too dark and grim, so he chose to leave. Teaming up with artists J. Scott Campbell and Humberto Ramos, the three of them founded Cliffhanger Comics, which at the time was published by Image. A lot of people, myself included, read about this change in Wizard magazine, the only way to get news about the industry in the pre-internet era. There, Cliffhanger was billed as a new iteration of the Image Exodus, in which some of the industry's top talent left the big companies like Marvel and DC in order to tell and own their own stories. Even as someone who couldn't find, or who had no interest in books like Spawn or Witchblade, I still knew about them. Their impact on the industry at the time cannot be denied. And here I was, watching it unfold for the second time, right before my very eyes. What a time to be alive. Cliffhanger's initial offerings were just 3 books. Campbell's sexy spy comic Danger Girls, Ramos on the vampiric Crimson, and Joe Mad on the fantasy-inspired Battle Chasers. I was ready for this. I was built for this. My favorite genre of novel paired with my favorite comic book artist? Could life get any better? Well, it could have if I had found the damn thing. I still didn't realize at this point that a comic shop could or would order a book for you if you asked them to. Despite being released in April of 1998, I didn't see an issue of Battle Chasers in a comic store until issue 7 came out, and only 9 issues of the book were ever released. You see, while Battle Chasers was a generally well-received title, it was late as no swearing. There were 16 months between issue 6 and 7, a year and a third. The rumor was that Joe Mad liked playing video games more than he liked comic books, but I don't know, I never quite bought that. While he did need fill-in artists on Uncanny, he also drew a majority of the issues during his run. He was clearly able to work, but for whatever reason, he just didn't work on Battle Chasers in the same way. This could be due to the lack of an overall editorial influence and a structure that Marvel would have provided that Cliffhanger would not have. There may be something to that rumor, though, as Joe Mad would eventually go into the game design industry. He worked on a number of projects over the years, but his love for the idea of Battle Chasers never waned. In 2017, Joe Mad launched a Kickstarter for a Battle Chasers video game called Night War. Almost 20 years after launching the comic, Mad returned to it. I haven't played Night War yet, but it is on my Switch, just waiting for me to be free enough to play it, and it has been fairly well received online. So I figured that I would return to the comic as well. I'm much older and a little wiser, and I won't lie, I'm a bit hesitant to do this. I'm kind of sure that my fanboy love of Joe Mad's artwork blinded me to any flaws that this book might have had when I first collected it. And this is the first time that I'm going to sit down and be critical of it. That didn't work out so well for Maverick, and I'm a little nervous about having a repeat performance. While the Battle Chasers comic is technically 9 issues long, there was a 10-page prelude released through anotheruniverse.com before the book launched. I don't know anything about this, though. Even after owning the book for a decade plus, I still have not been to anotheruniverse.com, and I am not sure why a famous comic artist would choose to stealth launch his first creator-owned title with some seemingly random website. But they did do it! So here's where we have to start. Battle Chasers Prelude was released in February 1998 and was co-written by Joe Mad and Munir Sharif. I either totally forgot this fact or I didn't realize it at the time. The stars in my eyes must have blinded me to Sharif's contribution. According to Sharif's own website, he wrote Battle Chasers while he was the creative director for Toyota. Wow. That is really unexpected of a comic book author. Most of Sharif's background is in some form of advertising outside of Battle Chasers here, and the American version of the Battle of the Planets comic. I have no idea how the workload worked between Sharif and Mad, so I'll do my best to credit them both for writing and concept problems when they arise. Or give them credit when something goes well. I can't forget to do that. Joe Mad, naturally, drew the prelude, while Vince Russell and Tom McWeeny, stop snickering, inked it with liquid on colors. Enough of my setup! Let's read this freaking comic. The prelude starts at a large house in the woods. Warm light shines through the windows into the dark night's gloom. Smoke rises from the fireplace. The narration tells us that this is the house of Aramis, a decorated military hero of the Unified Territories. But Aramis is not at home. He has been missing for months. This leaves his young daughter, Gully, at the house with her nanny. Gully is, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She has medium-length blonde hair, big green eyes, and is dressed in pretty simple clothing. Her father's massive green cloak is wrapped around her as she reads one of his strategy books, trying to find some comfort in them. Within the book, Aramis talks about retreat sometimes being a necessary tactic, required to draw the enemy away from the very thing that you want to protect. Thunder fills the air as lightning strikes nearby. Gully looks out the window, asking her father if that is why he left. Is he protecting Gully and her nanny? And if so, what is he protecting them from? Downstairs, Nanny is setting out dinner. She remarks that the weather is awfully strange, but a voice from a nearby closet tells her to be silent. We see the door open up just a hair. A man's weathered face glares out, his knife sliding between the door and its frame. Be quiet. They could be watching, and he is sure that they won't be long now. And it turns out he's right, because there is immediately a knock on the door. Upstairs, Gully leaps up and starts to run out of Aramis's study, thinking that maybe he's finally come home. Nanny begs the man in the closet to let her not open that door, but he insists. This is the only way to protect the girl. As Nanny opens the door, lightning strikes once more and reveals 4 men standing outside. The first among them, handsome with dark hair, smiles. Can they come in? He guides Nanny to the side, allowing his 3 compatriots to enter the building. He thanks Nanny for her kindness and introduces himself as Victor. They have been hired by the leaders of the civil territories. Wait, civil territories? I thought that these were the unified territories. I mean, either way, that makes for a lackluster Fantasyland name, so it's not like they can't work, but are we in the civil territories or the unified territories? Is there a difference? I don't know. In either case, Victor and his pals have been hired to find Aramis, and this is where he pulls out a signed document. They have paperwork confirming that they are not only bounty hunters, but that they have permission to seize any belongings that they believe to be clues. Nanny reviews the paperwork, and sure, it seems to be in order. What are they looking for, exactly? Victor assures her that they will know it when they find it. Gully, just reaching the stairs, is suddenly grabbed from behind. A gloved hand closes over her mouth. The man hushes her, and then releases her. Gully quietly asks him who he is. The man doesn't actually answer, but he does apologize for scaring her. He then tells her to stay in her room. There might be something dangerous happening downstairs. Gully says that she will. Victor asks Nanny if there are any other people in the house that they could question, like, I don't know, maybe a member of Aramis's family? Nanny stutters. What? No? That'd be crazy. She is totally alone here. Just, her and her dinner. Just, nobody else here. The old man in the closet, with no warning and for seemingly no reason, suddenly bursts out of the closet and draws his sword. 7 more men enter the room, all of them armed. They are the royal guard, and Victor is happy to see them. They're all on the same side, after all. He begins to explain to the guard what he already told Nanny, but the old guard cuts him off. Silence. No explanation will save them now. The guards found the bodies of the real trackers that had been sent by the civil/unified territories in the woods, massacred. The old guard trained those men himself, and it is taking every scrap of his honor not to kill these imposters now. But first, he wants to know who sent them on this mission. A feral grin grows on Victor and his allies' faces. Oh, good. Quote, he has been dying to get out of these clothes all day. Unquote. He then presses on a green brooch that's pinned to his cloak. Victor and his men scream as their bodies twist and contort. Those screams turn into growls as they're revealed to be massive werewolves, easily twice the height of the guards. Victor grabs the old guard by the face and crushes it in his hand. Well, that escalated quickly. Victor and his pack, I guess, tear through the royal guards, killing many of them with just one strike. But their deaths buy Nanny the time that she needs. She retrieves a small wooden box from the fireplace, its nature hidden by cloth. Then she runs upstairs to Gully, telling the girl that there's no time left. Victor and his pack turn their attention to Nanny's flight. Their master ordered them to find an ornate box, for within it lies unimaginable power. One of the wolves leaps upstairs and grins at Nanny. Gully shouts out, warning Nanny of the monster, but the woman knows her job. She shoves the box at Gully and, in the process, the wrapping slips. The box certainly is decorated, although I don't know if I would call it ornately decorated. Gully scoops it up, then asks Nanny to come with her. But instead, Nanny tells her to run. She then spins around and draws a kitchen knife. She sneers. They will never touch the girl. Gully climbs out of a window to a nearby tree, goes down it, and then flees into the woods. Is this a short prelude? Yeah, it sure is. But you know what? It's a prelude, not a full-blown comic issue, and its purpose is to get us invested in a story enough to buy the actual comic. If we can buy Gully's narrative and follow her into the main Battle Chasers series, then the prelude has done its job. We now know about Aramis and that he's missing, and more importantly, that his missing matters. Whatever land we're in, civil or unified or temperate or shrug, the government finds Aramis important enough to not only send bounty hunters after, but royal guards as well. More importantly, Aramis's disappearance has had an effect on Gully. A lot of her appeal here is just built into the fact that she's a cute little girl, and don't you care about her? So she's super shallow in this. But she's also worried about her father, and that will motivate her in the main series. While her main quest will be to find her father, going on a quest to find him will also strengthen her as a person, and make her a warrior in her own right. Aramis's legacy will become something that she either has to live up to or defy, and Mad and Sharif have established that Gully reads her father's books, so while she may be a little girl, she isn't going to be a complete fool either. I like the general story structure of the prelude. The old guard at his first appearance feels very threatening, as if he's lying in wait for Gully like a thief or a kidnapper. Then the handsome Victor shows up, and he certainly looks like what I would expect of a hero in a fantasy comic. He is polite, he is flattering, and all of his paperwork is in order. That's hot. For a moment, if you were to go into this story blind, it almost feels like the heroes have finally arrived and we are about to walk into a trap. But then the guards reveal themselves, and we learn that things are much different than we thought. The design of the werewolves is great, too. They are big and intimidating, with huge smiles filled with razor-sharp teeth. They're partially armed and armored, with glowing yellow eyes. Most of the actual murdering happens tastefully off-panel, keeping this book strangely PG-13. I don't quite get the backstory that's going on here, though. I get that Aramis has gone missing. I dig that. That's fine. Screw it. I'm just going to call them the Territories until I get another name for this land. The Territories sent out a band of former guardsmen who are now bounty hunters to question Nanny and look for Aramis. Those trackers were killed by the wolves and were then magically impersonated. The wolves went to Aramis's house to find a box. The guardsmen were also sent by the Territories, found the dead bodies of those trackers, somehow reached Aramis's home first, and then laid a trap for the wolves. So, what did the wolves do after killing the trackers? Did they take a nap or go on vacation or what? How did the guards, who state that they were sent after the trackers were, get to Aramis's house before the wolves? And why didn't the wolves hide the bodies? Is this supposed to be a sign of their arrogance, that they're so powerful that they aren't worried about someone finding the corpses? If they aren't worried about being found out, then why impersonate the men? The only reason to impersonate those trackers is to get into Aramis's house sneakily, acquire the box that they've been sent after, and then leave peacefully. But killing everyone involved was clearly an option, and I can't help but think that storming the house, capturing and killing or torturing Nanny and Gully would have been a much more effective way of instilling fear. Then they could have just torn the house apart too in order to find the box. I'm not quite sure if I had a good point in that last portion, but I'm not sure that Battle Chasers really did either. The thought process behind the wolves' actions don't feel very well thought out. Sure, we're only 8 pages into the story and their characters didn't get much focus, but this still feels really light on those kind of details and that kind of logic. I can fear the wolves in this as they present a clear and immediate threat, but I can't fear whatever or whoever they're working for, because I think they're probably an idiot. This is also the second plus-sized nanny of Joe Mads that I have seen get killed. Monet St. Croix had a caretaker in Uncanny X-Men issue 316 who died defending her from the Phalanx invasion. Sorry, ladies. The lettering in this prelude is also really annoying to me. This isn't because it's badly done, or misplaced, or missing something, as sometimes happened in Maverick's ongoing series. Rather, the lettering here is just so overdone that it's obnoxious. Richard Starkings and Comicraft lettered the Prelude, and don't get me wrong, they are professionals. Comicraft is one of the premier letterers in the late 90s. They know what they're doing, and what they do here certainly has polish. The dialogue balloons are well placed and point to the appropriate speaker. Emphasis in dialogue is very well placed, increasing the feel of the characters acting to me. But the lettering is so varied. On page 1, we have white letters over the black borders of the page. We have black letters over white and green narration boxes. We have white letters inside of a red narration circle. A parchment page from one of Aramis's book written in an old-timey script. A big crackoom sound effect. And then really emphasized dialogue from the old guard. This feels like someone making a student film and overusing different screen wipes or oversalting a dish that they cooked. If the narration was all white on black, then that's fine. But then just do it for everything. Don't switch to black on green or white on red, especially since the red has no place in the tone of this scene as everything is colored really mutedly. There are lots of natural tones as the house is made of wood, and most of Gully's clothing looks green because of Aramis's cloak, and things are honestly kind of dark to emphasize the sinister nature of what's happening. But the red bubble just screams on the page, immediately drawing my eye to it. Pages without narration work well. Again, the word balloons work in this story. The sound effects are a bit too showy for me, but that might be a personal thing. I was leaning towards fewer effects in my own comics before I stopped making them. Most people can imagine the sound of thunder, or a punch, or of wood splitting if they can see it happening, and in a comic you should be able to see that happening. Slapping a photoshopped effect over some beautiful artwork just feels like a disservice to me, especially since so much of this book was sold based upon Joe Mad's artistic involvement. The final 2 pages of the Prelude are dedicated to some sketchbook pages, meant to garner more interest in the ongoing series. Given the shorter nature of this story, I get the feeling that Mad wanted to showcase some of the bigger things that Battle Chasers would have in it. This includes artwork of leading lady Red Monica, who I'll talk about more next episode, and some monsters that'll feature in the book. This is a neat little section, although it hints at very little to come from a story perspective, which I think is a shame. Some penciled pages from Battle Chasers issue 1 would have gone great here, in my opinion, and helped to invest me further in the issue. As someone who picked this up because he liked Joe Mad's artwork, though, this is a really neat, behind the scenes of what Mad's unfinished work looks like. I hope you all didn't mind the slightly more backstory-heavy nature of this episode. I knew going into Battle Chasers that I was going to have to talk about the origins of Cliffhanger Comics, at least to some degree, as well as my usual spiel about how I discovered the book and what it meant to me. But I felt like pairing that material with the prelude and the first issue would have been way too long and would have resulted in another hour-long episode. So this allows me to keep things nice and manageable. Next episode, we're going to be back to our usual 2 issues per, which should run nicely until the book ends at issue 9, which should then also leave me enough room to wrap up the whole series in that episode. You can't see it, but I am giving a thumbs up here. Next week, Battle Chasers begins in earnest, as Gully's flight leads her to some strange allies. We also meet more of our cast, including the drunken warrior Garrison, the mercenary Red Monica, and kick off the disasters that will plague them during our first few issues. Join me for episode 11.2, The Battle Begins. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.